Well, thank you for this introduction. I learned so much about myself, and I'm very impressed. I hope you are too. I'd like to give you a picture about Israel, strategically speaking. And I think we are in dire need of such a picture because what is being reported about Israel is not only distorted because there is animosity and because there is shallowness of the media and so on, but also because of a very specific defect that Jews have. Some would say a genetic defect, and since the audience here is pro-Israeli, I feel very free to discuss it. Jews only feel good when they feel bad. That's the only way a Jew can feel good, that when he feels bad. So Israelis say about themselves things that are not true because they feel it makes them cute. But the problem is that others take them seriously and therefore cannot assess the very unique situation Israel is in. On the one hand, Israel has enormous challenges of its national security, challenges that no other democratic open society has ever faced for such a long time. We've never had this kind of society facing a war that has lasted for 140 years. This is what we are facing, and we will probably continue to face it for the next 140 years. This is an enormous challenge. And not only that things are very bad when it comes to our regional environment and international environment, they're getting worse. They're getting worse in the region, they're getting worse on the international level, and Israel is facing very serious difficulties. But what people fail to appreciate, and they fail to ask the right question, and therefore they cannot get an intelligent answer, is what can we present in the face of such challenges? In other words, not only what are the difficulties, but what are the assets that we can use in order to deal with these difficulties. And a very shallow perception of optimism and pessimism says, if you say that the situation is bad and it's getting worse, you must be a pessimist. The real question comes to the issue of net assessment. Namely, when you present your asset vis-a-vis your difficulty, what grows faster? Are you becoming stronger faster than your problems are growing? Then you're in good shape, even if the situation is bad. And if you are not able to find good answers to serious questions, then you are doomed. And let me here juxtapose two elements. I think Europe is a continent committing suicide. First of all, demographically, people who don't like their children don't have a future. And people who don't have children, look at Europe, won't have a future. They will have less of their own children and more Arab immigrants, and they should enjoy each other's company. This is what I'm saying. As an outsider, I think both sides deserve each other. But also, and to me this is more serious, Europeans have lost confidence in their own values. They're not proud in their own values. And I think this is another element where the Europeans are in a very difficult situation. And if you ask me if Israel, with all the difficulties, or Europe, with all their difficulties, if Israel is in better shape or in worse shape than Europe, I would say in much, much better shape than Europe, not because our difficulties are smaller, they're much greater, but because we have something to present against our difficulties. Let me very shortly, because I was given only 20 minutes and I will only overstep my bounds for about another 20 minutes, so I will try to be very concise and speak very shortly about our difficulties, very shortly about our assets, and then try to give a net assessment of the two. First, concerning the difficulties. We live in the Middle East. It's the most repulsive part of the world. What you have in the Middle East is a society, the Arab society, that failed, and there is self-admittance in the Arab world that they have failed in everything they wanted to achieve in the last 200 years. Were they great 1400 years ago? Yes. Do they have it in them to come back to their period of glory? Perhaps. I don't know. Probably yes. I don't know what will happen in 200 years. You'll have to ask Shimon Peres. He'll still be in office, and I'm sure he'll give you a very good answer. But in terms of the present generation, the next generation, not only are they in a very difficult situation concerning what they have not achieved in the last 200 years, they're also hopeless, and rightfully hopeless, about the near future. You probably know the story from Greek mythology of King Midas. Everything he touched turned into gold. What the Arabs have done in the last 200 years also turned into something. Gold, it is not. Much more organic substance. And the Arab world recognizes it. It is said openly today in the Arab world that this failure is so bad. But failures in the past should not determine what is happening in the future. The problem is you see no beginnings in the Arab world of seriously dealing with these problems in a way that in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, the situation will be better. It gets worse. And we are stuck in the middle of a region that is in a hopeless situation. It's not only a few dysfunctional countries or failed states, it is a failed region. Now, you could say, okay, some of these Arabs are our enemies. We can rejoice in the fact that their lot is so bad. We couldn't, we shouldn't. Because when it's bad for them, there is a spillover for us. And we live in a region that is unbelievably unstable, unbelievably violent, to a degree that is difficult for us to comprehend. We look at what is happening at the Islamic State and we are shocked. They only celebrate what is happening in the rest of the Arab world behind closed doors. This is the Middle East, and unfortunately, positive elements in the Arab world. Many Arabs that I know personally, hundreds of them that I know personally, that are very impressive. They know what is wrong with the Arab world. They're willing to do something about it. One of them recently told me, I said to him, every time I see you, it warms my heart. He says, don't misunderstand the situation. People like me are not marginal in the Arab world. We are negligible. This is the problem. Not that you don't have Arabs who are very serious and willing to do a lot about it, but they don't have the support of the mainstream of their society. And even if miraculously we would find a solution for borders and Jerusalem and refugees and what have you, you still live in the midst of this despair, in the midst of this failure, in the midst of this inability to deal with the failure, envious of the fact that the Arabs who should have been great are at the bottom of the barrel, and the Israelis, the Jews who should have been humiliated, are at the peak of the world. This envy is enough to explain, even without the specific components of the Arab-Israeli conflict, why the option of peace in the Middle East is practically non-existent, not in the foreseeable future. And here is some good news that will sound to you as bad news, but it is good news. The fact that the Israeli public opinion now recognizes that peace is not an option is a very good thing. Look at this last election campaign. People on the left who are trying to bring illusions about how they will solve problems and so on are very careful. Nobody in the Israeli political spectrum speaks out the word peace. The word peace has been taken out of the vocabulary even of the left, because they know they say peace, they will lose the support of the Israeli people, because nobody takes it seriously. And it's good news, because knowing where you live, understanding what your challenges are, is a very good situation compared to the alternative of cheating yourself. If this was not enough to depress you, and I see very few suicides in the room for the moment, let me make it easier for those of you who are already inclined in this direction and speak about what is happening in international organizations. We are in a terrible state where the most common enterprise anywhere in an international organization is Israel bashing. This is what they do. This is what the United Nations is all about. And it cannot be different. The United Nations is an institution that is an insult to civilized humanity, because what you have there is representations of countries who are mostly non-democratic, non-open, many of them barbaric, and they have taken all the basic values that we cherish and they have prostituted it to a degree that is unbelievable. So the people who sit in judgment on Israel and say that we have violated human rights are the Sudanese and the Syrians and the Libyans and the Cubans and the North Koreans and the other Lamedvavniks throughout the international community. And what you have there, I'm only expecting that very soon Israel will be condemned for killing the Dead Sea. I mean, after all, we're there, we must have done it, and now we need to be condemned for it. And it's getting worse every year. When you come to the point where you think it can't get any worse, it's getting worse. And who's aiding and abetting in it? The Europeans. Because what you have is automatically 22 Arab states against us, 58 Muslim states against us, 137 so-called non-aligned states with us, and then come the 28 European and they abstain. So when they say that we treat everybody like the Nazis, the Europeans abstain because they're not sure. We either do it or we don't do it. So forget it. Things are getting worse. Now, you can disregard the United Nations. It's more difficult to disregard Europe. Not because Europe is very important. It isn't very important and it's getting less important every day. But because in terms of its values, you can't disregard the Europeans because not only are they pursuing the values that we cherish, also we've learned these values from them. So we are taking them seriously when they speak to us about what we are doing. But unfortunately, what is happening to Europe is that it's turning away from Israel, not so much the European governments. On a bilateral level, we have relatively good relations. Most European governments are either friendly or fair-minded. The problem is there is something profoundly wrong and sick with European elites, with the academic elites, with the media elites, with the arts elites. And by the way, the worst elites in Europe are in Britain, are in this country, particularly in British academia, or if you look at The Independent, or if you look at what is happening in some of the British media. The BBC gets up in the morning just to lie about Jews. This is what they do. I mean, this is what the mission of the BBC. And in time, Europeans begin to believe what their media tells them. So it starts with the elites, but it gets all over Europe. And what we have with Europe is a structural problem. And here is an interesting thing. We have a major problem with Europe, but we don't have a dilemma. The problem is that the Europeans, who cannot agree on anything else, the only thing they can agree about is criticizing Israel, criticize Israel and try to undermine many things that Israel is doing, and they're trying to prove to us that we have to take them seriously, which is very difficult. So they're trying to show us that they can harm us, and they can harm us, and they show us that they can harm us. So it's a problem, and it's a very serious problem. Why is it not a dilemma? Because listening to the Europeans is not an option. If, God forbid, we would have taken Europe seriously, Israel would not have been in existence. Let me give you only 3 minor examples. If we would have listened to the Europeans, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons, Assad would have had nuclear weapons, and suicide bombers would be still roaming the streets in Tel Aviv like a decade ago. So you can't take them seriously. We don't have a dilemma, but we have a very serious problem. We also have a problem with the present American administration. So those of you who are not yet in despair, I invite you now to join me on another step of it. We have a president, and I have to quote Moshe Dayan. He had a fine definition that applies to Obama. He used to call certain people to say, this is a good guy in the bad sense of the term. And this is Obama. He's a good guy. He's not an enemy of Israel like Jimmy Carter. Obama simply is clueless. I mean, if I were to be commissioned to write a book about what not to do in the Middle East, Obama would sue me for plagiarism. I can't think of one move that was not unbelievably dumb in terms of American interest. Forget Israeli interest. Forget Israel in the Middle East. Just look at the position of the United States and see how we treated the Muslim brothers in Egypt vis-a-vis Sisi. So we have a problem that is very fundamental. By now, I hope you're all in despair, and now is the time to go from the bad news to the not so bad news. Now, usually you go from bad news to good news, but we're Jews, we know that we cannot have the equivalent. This is something I always enjoy telling. The story of somebody in the Komsomol coming in Brezhnev's time and saying, comrades, I have bad news and good news. First, the bad news, the Chinese have landed on the moon. Now the good news, all of them. I wish I had something that would be equivalent to it. I don't, so let's speak about the less bad news. The first is that our relationship with the American people is excellent, regardless of the American president. We have something like 2/3 or 3/4, depending how you measure, of the American people in support of Israel, because we have a very similar ethos. And the Israeli and American ethos is very different from the European ethos. The European ethos, in the last 100 years, since the Great War, a European looks out the window, says, beautiful day, who can we capitulate to today? Okay, is there an Adolf? If not an Adolf, give me a Joseph. If there's no Joseph, give me a Yasser, anybody. I feel good only when I capitulate to somebody, so now they get Putin. Okay, so Europeans believe when the danger comes, roll over and play dead, and who knows, things will go over and the Americans will come to save us. Israelis and Americans are very different. Okay, let me give you only one example to demonstrate it. I recently visited in the United States the Air and Space Museum, and they had the Enola Gay there, the aircraft that dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. And Americans were very fondly about the Enola Gay because they said, you never know when you have to kill many people again, and it's nice to have something like that. You never know when you may need it. The Europeans, correct me here if I'm wrong, you may know about the British attitude more than me. As far as I know, the British have not given the Victoria Cross to the Bomber Command in Second World War and Bomber Harris because they did terrible things like killing civilians. I think they did a great job. When you're at war, that's what you do. When you want to defeat Hitler, you don't use Interflora. You'll use your Air Force, okay? And you do what needs to be done. Europeans are ashamed of having to defend themselves. And Americans, I mean the American people, not Obama, the American people are basically on the same page with the Israelis. Let me quote here an American nursery rhyme that sums it up. Once there was a little girl and she had a little curl in the middle of her forehead, and when she was good, she was very, very good. But when she was bad, she was horrid. Okay? And Americans understand sometimes you have to be horrid, otherwise the bad guys take over. If you don't kill the bad guys, the good guys can't have a good life. Americans understand it. So one element, one asset that Israel has is the support of the American people. The second asset, by far the most important, by far more important than anything I'm telling you here about assets and about challenges, is the Israeli society. And this is something very difficult to see. The Israeli society is the eighth wonder of the world. Israelis are even more unpleasant than other Jews. Yes, I mean, this is our privilege, you know. We are like everybody else, only more so in practically every way. So Jews are basically unpleasant, and Israelis are more unpleasant even than Jews. It's difficult, but we've worked at it, and we're not bad. But because we are so unpleasant, we don't see the miracles that we have produced in Israel. Let me give you 3 demonstrations of it, just to show that we're not speaking about one particular achievement, but about something that is across the board. Any country in 140 years of war would not have developed a democratic system, particularly when the overwhelming majority of the people who came to this country came without any kind of democratic heritage. I mean, a Jew from Morocco didn't come to Israel with the great Moroccan heritage of democracy and an open society. But even the people in Israel who call themselves European came primarily from the armpit of Europe, namely from Russia and Poland, not from the big centers of enlightenment in Europe. So their experience was either Tsarism or communism, great things for an open society. And in spite of the fact that we got the worst people that you can possibly imagine, and we lived in war, we have a democracy in Israel that doesn't border on fascism, it borders on anarchy. And it's fun to have anarchy. I mean, we are running an Israeli military where there is no equivalent for the word sir. Try to run any other army without it. Because, and it's a nice thing. The whole period of my military service, I was only in jail for 7 days. If we really had discipline in the Israeli army, I would never leave jail. I would spend 3 years in jail and just start elsewhere. We have established a system in the most unlikely environment for the creation of democracy, even preservation of an existing democracy, and we have a fine democracy. It's repulsive, but it works, okay? So this is one very major achievement. Another one, many of you may remember, 33 years ago, the elections of 1981, we were on the verge of civil war in Israel between Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews. These are the 81 elections. For those of you who are more knowledgeable about it, it was called the Chachchachim election in Israel. It was a terrible situation. Only 33 years later, it's a very short time in historical terms, the Bureau of Statistics in Israel announced that they can no longer follow who's Sephardic and who's an Ashkenazi, because the mixed marriages in Israel came to such a level that practically every Israeli family is affected by these mixed marriages. So I'm not saying there's no conflict. I'm saying the conflict came into the family. I mean, this is the whole idea. And as you may know, Israelis, unlike Americans, when you hate somebody, this is what you tell him when you meet him. In other words, Americans are very careful between black and white not to say something that can be misperceived as if it is racism. In Israel, racism is the soup du jour. I mean, this is, you meet a good friend of you, you say, you dirty Moroccan, what have you... And then he says to me, what a yekepots are you, and what have you done here, and what have you done there? And basically, this is how people marry. I mean, they curse each other, they hate each other. Namely, they do before marriage what they will be doing after marriage anyway. So it's a very good way of bringing people together. And today, with the exception of the professional Moroccans, we have a few university professors who are professional Moroccans. They live from being Moroccans or Iraqis. With the exception of very, very few, you can find all of them in Haaretz if you are affected by this newspaper. The Israeli society functions beautifully on this. It's a tremendous achievement, only we're not willing to take credit for it. The third thing is the Israeli economy. We started as a poor country where we had nothing to eat. Today, I hope nobody here from the United Jewish Appeal is here, today Israel is a rich country, okay? We spend today on not eating, namely on dieting, more than Africa spends on food, just to give you one proportion to look at. And what we have in Israel is a society that functions in an unpleasant way, but it functions very, very well. And if you ask Israelis about themselves, Israelis don't leave the country. Here is where the journalists lie because they want to lie, because they get up in the morning in order to lie. Israel has the second lowest rate of people leaving Israel from all OECD countries. Israel recently spoke about the Israelis going to Berlin. All of Israel is going to Berlin. I was recently in Berlin. I was surprised some people still speak German. It's unbelievable. And you have this lie. Okay, by the way, per capita, more people leave Germany than leave Israel. More people leave Britain than leave Israel, and for a good reason, I would too. But Israelis want to stay. Now, many of us have European passports, myself included. Very easily, I could live anywhere else on earth. I speak languages. I'm brilliant, okay? I have you. And modest. So it's very easy. I just now spent 2 years as a visiting professor at Georgetown University, one of the finest universities in the world. No problem, okay? And so many of us can do it, and we don't leave Israel. And here is an interesting thing. A public opinion poll in Israel is 508 people. They say that it represents all part of the society. We have one public opinion poll that is 33,500 people. It's done by the Central Bureau of Statistics. We have it once a year. And they ask Israeli 2 questions. The first is, what do you think about Israel? The second is, how is your life? The first question, Israelis say, oh, the country is terrible. The economy is collapsing, and we are becoming fascist, and everything doesn't work, and things are terrible. And then they ask people, how's your life? And they say, I'm great, okay? About 80% of the people say, and the others lie, we're great, our life is great. What do you expect for next year? Even better, okay? So basically the situation in Israel is very good, only we complain, because if you stop complaining, they revoke your Israeli citizenship. I mean, you have to be very careful. And complaining, kvetching, as it should be known among Jews, kvetching is something that Jews are supposed to do, otherwise they lose their identity. So let's try and give you a more balanced picture and say the following. Things are bad, they will get worse. We have enemies not only in the regional context, increasingly even in Europe. We have them on the international level. Everybody blames us for practically everything, and things are somewhat unpleasant. The question is, how do you respond to such a challenge? Let me give you an example from a few months ago. We had a war for 50 days. Israeli cities were bombarded. The overwhelming majority of Israeli society were in air raid shelters. What happened immediately when the war was over? The Israelis shook off the dust from their clothes and started a new day, and they've forgotten there is a war. They only discuss, will the next war come in 3 weeks, or in 3 months, or in 3 years, or in 6 years? And Israelis know that peace is not an option. And Israelis know that when they send their children to the army, this army actually goes to war. And Israelis know that the next war is coming. I'm delighted that now we've started to give them numbers. The first Lebanon war, the second Lebanon war. This will make it possible in the future for historians to remember if the 23rd war in Lebanon is after or before the 22nd war in Lebanon. It will be very helpful. You live in an area, and Israelis understand it, where this is what you get. You see, Americans have earthquakes and mudslides and tornadoes, and we have Arabs. It's a different kind of natural disaster. It comes from time to time. Sometimes a few people get killed. Per capita, less Israelis get killed than per capita. Then in America, people are killed from these natural disasters. So we don't have hurricanes, okay? So here is one disaster we don't have. By the way, it's probably coming. It doesn't make any sense that they won't come. Tornadoes will make aliyah, I'm sure, very soon. But basically, Israelis know that they can live with it. They say, you know, this is unpleasant, but it's a good life. And here is where I want to live. And here is where I feel safe and good as a Jew. As a European Jew, I wouldn't say it. As an Israeli Jew, I can say, yes, somebody can shoot me in the street. But I draw faster, and I can always convince him with a 9mm caliber argument between his eyes that he's wrong, that he should not have used his AK-47 against me. So the idea of being in a situation that is dangerous, but you can do something about it. Here, when it's dangerous, you can kvetch. Okay, kvetching doesn't help very much. We have a long history of kvetching, and it didn't help us very much. So basically, the situation is good. And I want to end my presentation with a joke, and I hope some of you have already heard it, because I never speak without using this joke, because it is so instructive. It's not funny, but it's so instructive. And you'll forget the lecture and you'll remember the joke, and that's all I want. I want you to remember the joke. The story is about God Almighty that is sick and tired of the human race, and I can understand him. And he says, I'll bring a flood. But this time, a real flood. Comme il faut, wie es sich gehört. A real flood. No Noah, no ark, no anything. Just obliterate everything. So he calls to him the three leaders of the monotheistic faith, and he says to them, go to your people and tell them that in 2 weeks it's over. So the Christian comes to his community and he says, we've sinned. We have 2 weeks, let's do good deeds, let's pray, maybe they'll let us through the pearly gates. The Muslim says, we've been perfect all the time, so let's be perfect for 2 more weeks and things will go well. And the Jew comes to his people and he says, guys, we have 2 weeks to learn how to live underwater. This is the essence of it all. Thank you.